So welcome everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Before we get into Troy, I want to start with our sponsor for the month, which is Hebner Marketing. Hebner has done a ton of work for us. They help back end with a lot of the marketing that most of us see. And they're also doing a ton of work for us regarding the Drive to Fab event. So we honestly, guys, probably would not be where we are without them. So just a quick video to talk about them, and we appreciate them sponsoring us this month.
Hello, my name is Brian Gershner and I'm with Hebner Marketing. And we're really proud to be here and support the Coffee, Lunch, and Learn with RVWA. And we're also really proud to be a sponsor of RVWA and to be able to help them produce and distribute a lot of the marketing they do so that we can bring everybody together here today the way we have. And one of the things we're really proud of is how RVWA is bringing a lot of relevant content and messaging to the industry, and how that is just supporting and bringing more and more value to the industry as a whole. I love it too, because it's a lot of the same values and efforts that we put into our own marketing. As a marketing agency and working with partners, being relevant and being able to bring that value to the table to your audiences and the people you work with is just a cornerstone of just the principles of marketing and how we help build brands also. Not only building the story, because a lot of you already know the stories of your companies, but being able to put together strategic roadmaps, strategies that help spend the marketing dollars more effectively, to be able to put offensive planning and forward thinking into what's happening, so that there's better ability to react and be prepared, and just to be there at the right time with the right messages, just so that you can not only reach out to your audiences, but helping to support the sales teams that you have in place that maintain and have those valuable relationships with your partners and your clients. At the end of the day, too, we know talk is only so much in planning. There's a lot of need to really get work done and to be cost effective at that. Hebner Marketing, in response to knowing this, and particularly working in the B2B environments, we have found ways to be very cost effective. We have very large digital support teams and creative teams that help us be very cost effective and to bring solutions and execution to the table to help people get things done. As we know, things never move fast enough often, particularly in industries as things are changing and as times are changing now. But we really are proud of the work that we've done with manufacturers and OEMs. And we're really proud of the work that we've done within the RV industry over the past 25 years and all of the various brands that we have worked with and supported. If you have time, please go to our website, hebnermarketing.com, and check out some of our partners and check out some of the work that we've done. We're really proud of it, and we're really proud to be here today also. Thank you. Enjoy.
Like I said, they are doing a ton of work for us behind the scenes and to help us with the Drive to Fab project. So we thank them for always sponsoring us. And to get into today, so many of you may have heard Troy on our the last Coffee, Lunch, and Learn we did with him, but we just didn't have time to get to all the questions. So today, Troy's going to do just a really quick rundown of his topic with customer service, and then also jump into really the nitty gritty, which was a lot of the questions that we didn't get to last time, and then any questions that you have. So if you have questions as we're going along, please put them in the chat, and then I will ask Troy the questions as we move through. So Troy, I'm going to turn it over to you. He's going to share his screen and talk to us about customer service from his perspective of 33 years in VP of service mostly, but now general manager, and 33 years in the industry.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I will tell you this. I'll preface my speech this afternoon, if you will, by stating that this is extremely difficult for me because I'm an animated speaker and I want to be on my feet and moving around and engaging and looking people in the eye, and I don't get to do that today. So just bear with me if it ever feels a little lumpy. As she said, I'm going to share the screen. So for me, I'm going to provide a little bit of the backstory in case you missed it last time. So this is a little bit of what we talked about last time. So, bear with me as I go through just a couple of the slides, and then we'll get into some of the questions that we did record and brought forward for sharing this afternoon. So, where did we start? We were talking about the intrinsic value of customer service and what does that mean to us as an individual, whether we're marketing ourselves, whether we're marketing a brand, or supporting the brand from a service perspective. So, that was the core of the last presentation. And then, well, how do we get there? So the how do we get there piece was hinged around some ingredients of foundational information that could help us prepare for that customer needs list. And are we really truly prepared for that? And then, we went into, so what does that needs list look like from our perspective? Well, and what the response was, and quite frankly still is it's very similar to our own needs list. If you look at the screen and you see, the information on the screen, it's very reflective of who we are as a people, the organizations and people that we're drawn to. We're drawn to people that are friendly, that demonstrate that they're honest from a core values perspective. They're timely, they're fair, they have a willingness to do the right thing. They're participatory in what's going on. They provide alternatives. So, they're not the people that just dump problems into your lap. They have a tendency to want to be part of the solution. These are the types of people that you as an individual gravitate toward. Also, the types of organizations that would demand, a sense of loyalty if we employ those types of behaviors and tenets from within our own organization. And lastly, in this list is the ability to over communicate. From a complaint handling perspective, we talked about that in some detail. That's also, embodied in a couple of the questions that we'll share. So we will walk through that, but we went through complaint handling in quite a bit of detail. But just to gloss through some of this stuff, you really need to, actively engage with the people and, demonstrate your ability to be a good listener through that process and to be both patient and persistent as you work through those scenarios. Because at the end of the day, sometimes with an escalated case, the best thing that you can do to advocate for yourself and your organization is to demonstrate, an appropriate amount of empathy, be a good listener. And at the end of the day, you are, in fact, establishing a relationship with them. To continue down that pathway, they didn't call us to tell us how great we are. And quite frankly, they probably didn't call us just to tell us that we suck, excuse me. And they called us because there's an issue. And an issue that they cannot resolve on their own, as we talk about, customer service specifically. But I think that this is, a pathway to many other areas of responsibility. So just bear with this example. As those customers call with that complaint, whatever that situation is, they are absolutely expecting that the receiver of that information, the person on the other end of the phone, is capable of owning that issue, carrying that baton or that ball for them and advocating on their behalf. And, being focused on being part of the solution is first and foremost, and then in appropriately advocating. I remember in my youth, having people tell me that, well, the customer's always right. And I will sit here today and quite frankly argue that point and say, hey, it's never wrong to do the right thing, but then the right thing needs to be equitable for all parties involved. And so that is not the blanket statement from, the 80s, if you will, that the customer was always right. From a psychology perspective, in the last time around, we talked about, some of where you may want to focus your energy and the words to not employ. words like, no, I don't know anything about that, or even how you say some of that kind of stuff, but to focus rather on what you can do versus what you can't. Emphasize that positive energy that you are, back to the first bullet point, focused on solutions. The next area there is, to be the great listener, and like your parents may have taught you at some point, people that argue, there's no winning in that. So do everything in your power to not engage in that. As we are summing up the last time around, I talked about statistically, or from an analytical perspective, how important providing great customer service is. And quite frankly, if this holds true from a brand recognition perspective, then I'm sure that it holds true if the customer service you're providing is to market yourself as an individual. But quite frankly, on that scale of 1 to 5, if you're a 5 and only getting 86% of those recipients, and you're at a 4 or less, and that drops off 30 points, then all of a sudden you can appreciate the fact or the risk that comes with virtually every interaction that you have. So it is truly an important tenet to make sure that you bring your A game when you're interacting with people or your organization, et cetera. To summarize the presentation as we ended it last time, we talked about, those tenets in summary, right? It's focus on being part of the solution. It's never wrong to do the right thing. From an organizational perspective, I think it's very important that, if you're part of a service organization, that you recognize that you hold the key to the organization, because there may be a brand in the product that you represent, but ultimately, the only face of the organization that the customer will ever recognize is your own. And the face might be just your voice, so whether you're, smiling through the telephone, or just proving that as an organization that you're easy to do business with. Last time I had brought up the fact that, from an RV industry perspective, which is the genesis of this organization and the backbone for it, we are in a nice to have business climate, right? We're not doctors and lawyers. So at the end of the day, our customers have a choice. So for us, we always have the goal to be the best. And part of being the best is to revere yourself as being easy to do business with. So I think it's important to put that in perspective, there. And then, and one of the tenets that used to be in vinyl printed on the wall in the past departments that I've written was to let our experience improve yours. And I meant that, because I'm trying to say that, if customers are calling into our organization, when they leave it, they need to be better for it. So in summary, with regard to the presentation from last time, I trust that everybody has a true desire for that. And so ultimately the goal from an industry perspective is to become the most desired brand. Again, whether that's yourself, whether you're in marketing, sales, service, none of that really matters. But the goal to become the most desired brand does. So that's, in summary, what we've covered last time. I know I provided the presentation to the RVWA group. So if you weren't with us last time, I'm sure that presentation could be more available to you. And quite frankly, if you have ultimate questions, even after this, my contact information would be available through them as well. Switching on to the questions.
That's a good point, Troy. Just so everybody knows, all of our videos are on our YouTube page. So you will be able to go back on our YouTube channel and see Troy's original presentation if you wanted to check that out.
Sure. Great. So let's just go through. Yep, it's a Word document, but I'll narrate, if you will. So these are some of the questions that were recorded last time that we just frankly didn't get to, and they may be the genesis for questions today. So we'll go through these and pick back up, because ultimately that is the purpose for today's session, is to make sure that the people that were involved from last time had their questions answered, and maybe you're the author of some of these questions, and I would be glad or happy for you to interject or further engage, just in case what I interpreted from the question or the spirit of the question wasn't responded to as you were trying to ask it. So starting at the top, and some of this, I'll tell you, I interpreted it as a reinforcement of behavior, or a statement rather than a question, if you will. So if there is an underlying question in there and you happen to offend the author, then by all means, please feel free to jump in there in the chat and let us know. And Jessica will keep us honest as to whether we bring that out for us. But it starts with common sense tips. You be a good listener and curious. That does wonders for you to know your customers. And again, this is almost a statement or a reinforcement rather, but my response is in the dark crimson colored font in each of the questions, by the way, as you're looking at your screen. But virtually I'm in a complete agreement with it, stating that it is critically important that we're relatable as an audience. And that's, even if you're meeting somebody for the first time, if you're representing your brand, you need to be relatable. You need to be willing and able to engage people appropriately, be willing to be relational. And frankly, in some of the slide detail that I provided, I talked about being a good listener. Well, what does that mean? Well, being a good listener really means that, quite frankly, we're listening to comprehend, right? We're not listening to repeat. We want to understand what the issue is, and make sure that we do everything in our power to not interrupt. The next question was, does having a 360-degree view of the customer across all interactions increase successful outcomes? Well, there's a couple schools of thought there. I mean, on one hand, I thought about it from a case management perspective, where the question could have been asking, so does having a good case management system, so you got that retention of information, provide value to you? And frankly, the answer is yes. Because let's go back in time. When I started service for Spartan Motors in 2000, and we introduced a case management system, some of the manufacturers that we did with, even right here in Northern Indiana, they wanted a person specific to their cause. Well, here's what I found out by that. I had a person, like, for example, supporting, Fleetwood's American Coach over in Decatur. He's taking upward of 50 calls a day, where you may have, a product, back in that day, where they're only selling 4 a month, whether that was, Coachman or Forest River or whatever that looked like. And so that person that was dedicated to that brand, maybe they're only taking 4 or 5 or 6 calls a day. And that was way lopsided. Didn't help us at all. So one of the first things that I did from a case management documentation perspective was to introduce to the manufacturers that we can't do that any longer, and quite frankly be effective. Because in that prior example, the person that was representing the Decatur American Coach division, he was spread too thin. His what was important to him were the wrong measurements. So what should have been important, which is quality, he quickly had to get into quantity discussion. And so we broke that up, we leveled the playing field. But what we did is we allowed that case management information to be, transparent and available. So whomever answered the phone could pick the ball up right from where the last person left off. And so that was one of the thought processes that came to mind, when I read this question, is does that, provide value? And quite frankly, if that was the genesis of the question, then I would absolutely say absolutely. Because quite frankly, it makes you, again, easier to do business with, because there's, from a customer engagement perspective, one of the most difficult things to overcome is, and I'm sure you can appreciate this because I know that we've been there, because we're in a culture where, we got to babysit everything, whether it's car insurance, health insurance, all that kind of stuff. And when you have an issue, you end up, calling in and pushing 50 buttons to get there from here. And what happens? You always have to start over again. And so as you're engaging with people, that is the worst thing to overcome, is the fact that, they have to start over again, start their story over again. It's a new name, it's a new person, got to start over again. So if you don't have to do that, then you're much better for it. The other school of thought there, Lo, was quite frankly, what I've got written here, and that was, if I understand this question, I don't think that it's not available a majority of the time. Strong service is provided by people that may not have all the answers all the time. So what I'm referring to is having intimate knowledge, of the customer, and those types of things are not going to be available, because you're not writing behavioral information, you're writing case specific information. So the people that are best employed in those departments are people that, quite frankly, think well on their feet and are able to, respond, quickly. Hey, it takes all different types for the world to go around. My background, quite frankly, in education is engineering, but I will tell you, I would much rather be the coach on the sideline, because that's just how I'm geared and how I'm wired, than sitting in front of Microsoft Project creating a Gantt chart. So everybody's wired differently. So there's a place for everything and everything in its place. And so to have people from within a customer service organization that have access to the case specific narrative, but are quick-witted and light on their feet with regard to interacting with the customer, that's the best recipe in my opinion. As we move forward, the next question there was, can you address how to deal with a problem customer? Maybe someone who is angry that their RV wasn't ready, when it was supposed to be. And we covered some of that in the first presentation, and that's why I hit the high notes with regard to that information as we started today. But the level of the playing field there, I want everyone to know that, it is situational. So back to my response on the last question, you definitely need to have people that, are kind of like the old slogan for the Marines, where you can adapt, improvise, and overcome, right? Those are the people that are going to, win more than they lose. And that's what you need in that environment is the people that are easily relational and can engage, and quite frankly, have a competitive spirit to want to overcome and want to win them over, probably as a better term. So to help you get there from here, I've documented some of the things that have worked well, not only for me personally, but as I train the staff as we move forward. And some of that begins with, let them know that you're here to help. Let them know that you are that person that's focused on being part of the solution, because that's quite frankly the foundational reason why they're there, right? It is absolutely the need to overcome their own obstacle. The next thing is, make sure that you understand the details. So that, for example, back to that, being a good listener thing, if you've ever had a listening class, which by the way, sometimes can be painful. So if you can skip it, I would recommend it. But the most important thing to take away is that it's how you demonstrate that. And we've all heard what, we'll use appropriate empathy and so on and so forth. Well, what does that mean? Well, sometimes, being a good listener means things like, you don't jump in to interrupt, that you, sometimes you appropriately repeat what you have heard. And that demonstrates the fact that, hey, I just want you to know I'm taking some copious notes, and here's what I got so far. I've heard that, when your slide goes in, it makes this noise or does this or does that. That's the detail that they're looking for as they've shared their experience and their pain, etc., that you're being a good listener. So that's the kind of thing that I would recommend to demonstrate appropriate empathy and demonstrate you're being a good listener as an example. And quite frankly, as you work through, if you're representing an organization in service, I think the next bullet, the hollow bullet there is specific to that area of responsibility. But if you need to do research, quite frankly, it's kind of like the Jeopardy music, in their head, that's when they hear, when they get this, uncomfortable moment of silence. So if it's going to be anything longer than a few seconds, quite frankly, I would recommend that you let them know. There is nothing wrong with, once you've got to I'll call it a comfortable spot in the conversation where you've gathered all their information, where they're at, and quite frankly, you're articulating where you're going and how you're going to get there, then it is fine to say, look, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, whatever that looks like, I need to go get more information because I don't have all the answers, but I am surrounded by the people that do. So I will tell you what, I will commit to calling you back by 2 p.m. today, or whatever that looks like. And here's the key to that, is the last part of that hollow bullet there. And make sure that you do what you say and say what you do. That is key to establishing that rapport, because there's nothing worse from a relational perspective to not be a person of your word, because ultimately when they don't hear from you at 2:05, then they're going to call back. They become their own worst enemy because they're going to call back and they're going to get somebody other than you. Maybe you haven't even entered your case notes yet because it's all research on a tablet of paper. And guess what they get to do? Start all over again. So that is why it's so important that we always do that. We do that in our personal life. We do that with our kids. We do that in our professional life. We do that as a department and service, etc. But don't, I got to be honest with you. We don't have a scripted example in front of us, so it can't be too early in the process. You need to make sure that you've got all of what you believe is, foundationally acceptable to at that point disengage and go, look, I need to do some homework, and I'll do that and I'll call you back by, but then it's do what you say and say what you do. It is that simple, and from a service perspective, quite frankly, the intrinsic knowledge you hold from within your organization of the processes, the details, the systems of your product, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that's what makes you invaluable. But quite frankly, supporting the brand from a service perspective, quite frankly, I don't want to say that's the easy part, but if you treat other people as you want to be treated, and you make it your purpose for living, so to speak, while you're at work, then that to me, and I definitely have a selfish interest here, but to me, that's how you build the brand. You really got two brands, right? You got the product, and then you got the people behind the product. But I will tell you that, and this is also available analytically and statistically, et cetera, that more people gravitate toward a brand and create lifelong loyalty based on, and I don't want to say that I want to recommend that our products fail, because that's a terrible thing, but still based on a service experience. So that, customers have had something happen and they've sought out, a portion of the organization to get assistance from, and they were so impressed by that experience that that's what brings them back. It might not be the best brand, it might not be the best whiz bang whatever, but it was, quite frankly, the confidence that they have that if and when that product that they purchase breaks, is that the integrity from within that organization is so strong that they'll be taken care of. That's what brings them back. And quite frankly, that's been proven over and over and over again. Before we started today, Jessica and I were talking a little bit about, you know, what we see moving forward. And quite frankly, from an industry perspective, you know, the industry will normalize again someday. And in my opinion, we need to be ready for that. And being ready for that is, you know, what are we doing as an organization to be what I would call customer centric? And customer centric involves all those tenets. That is at, you know, the employee level. That's the benefits and compensation. That is how we treat the people. You know, what are we doing culturally? I'm stealing. I like to steal shamelessly, and I'm going to do so. I mean, those were a lot of Jessica's words as we started today, but that also involves, you know, how we treat our customer, how we interact with them. How important are they? I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't write paychecks without them. So I think that's relatively important. So, you know, if we can bring that up to the forefront and demonstrate that from a value system perspective and engage the people in that, then I think that, you know, we can get there from here. And sometimes it's exposure. So with exposure, let's move on, because we'll get to that in the next page with one of the other questions, quite frankly. And another what I perceived to have been statement was, you know, empathy, trust, and transparency. Well, that embodies some of what we've already talked about today, up to and including it's never wrong to do the right thing, right? And quite frankly, I just believe that, you know, there's a whole bunch of tenets that we could have out there and print off and have on the wall, have you know, our own version of what's important to us, you know, in our purse, in our wallet, whatever that looks like, to remind us routinely how to get there from here, and why is that relevant. So, you know, another piece that, you know, I've always done from within the organizations that I've led is you come back to that foundational training in some version of frequency, and you do that because bad habits can happen so quickly, and quite frankly, they happen more often than not just as a result from the daily grind. So once they get involved in the daily grind, and they're kind of like a mechanic that is a flat rate mechanic, and he's looking for the quickest path to get there from here. Sometimes he avoids or overlooks certain processes that really should be done, but from a risk assessment perspective, he says, you know, what is the risk that will fail if I don't do that test, or if I don't do that piece of the process? He says, well, you know, 1 in 10 or 1 in 100, or, you know, he makes a purposeful decision to accept that risk. And so that kind of thing can happen, you know, especially in the seasonal times when we're in marketing or sales or service, and the volume of our business just simply increases. And so we start to sacrifice quality by introducing and accepting a higher volume of quantity. So I would always make time for us to come back, regroup, and every year we would have some version of new stories to tell, but always go back through that foundational service training just to make sure that it's kept in front of us. The next question in the list was, you know, what recommendations do you have to strengthen a customer service relationship with our customers when the customer service team is out of state? I'm not sure that person is, you know, in one of our local organizations, you know, because I just don't see that. And, you know, and I know a lot of people across, and my former colleagues across the industry, but that's okay. I mean, I have dealt with this personally. You know, when I was in past life experience, I managed or led service organizations that not only were in different states, but they represented a different product, family than maybe what I represented in my home base. You know, for example, at Spartan Motors, you know, at my home base, I represented Class A RVs and fire trucks. But you know, when we looked at Bristol, Indiana, you had Utilimaster and walk-in vans, or you go down to the Carolinas, and at the time we owned a company called Road Rescue that did ambulances and so on and so forth. So you definitely need to be able to adapt and to engage. And quite frankly, from a spirit of stealing shamelessly, which is terminology I've already shared today, there's a lot of opportunity to engage those people. It goes back to that cultural buy-in thing that we were talking about earlier, so they don't feel like they're left out in a lurch, but B, there can be some synergistic opportunities that make us better for it. So the response I got here is, I've managed multiple locations from multiple campuses, many times with different products, like I said. Always made a point to include them in our activities. So activities, it depends on the organization, what you're able to do. But, we did all kinds of different activities. And sometimes it would be, a company picnic or a departmental picnic that we would do. And then, we would encourage that location to do it. And then we would, share photos and talk about it in the next staff meeting that we would have between us. And that's just one example of many, excuse me. Some of the best synergies came from sharing knowledge across, the multiple business models. And that was everything from process, what worked well, the interacting up to and including, hey, we had to ship this part or, we called this person at this supplier and they were truly helpful. I mean, any or all of that kind of stuff is invaluable from sharing information. So, the other thing, quite frankly, is, we would do things, like as part of our staff meeting, we would include a portion of it that we would call situational readiness. It is a term in the military, and they have these sit rep meetings that are very short. But during that time, they usually just ask 3 questions. And the 3 questions are, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And where and how can we improve? And we would do that at each of the locations and then engage them, involve them, and ask them to share. And quite frankly, it goes back to one of the former tenets that I've talked about today, and that is, do what you say and say what you do. But as soon as, somebody says, hey, I've got this obstacle and I'm not sure how to overcome it. And so whether or not you personally have the answer or one of your colleagues, superiors, or whomever does, and you're able to provide that solution, then it becomes, you now become more desirable. You have now reinforced your own brand. And so they will then see you in that light, and they will start to engage more often and more frequently with that comfort to do so. So until you can see that for yourself, then I would just implore you to experiment with it. But here's one that I think that you can rationalize with, and another one of the items that I've shared with my staff is the more you do, the more you do. What the heck does that mean? Well, quite frankly, what the heck does the more you do, the more you do mean? Well, what it means is that when you become a resource that can be relied upon to get things done, whether that's the person sitting next to you, the department in front of you or behind you, or the customer that you're engaging with, then you become reliable to them. You're building trust and rapport with them. And all of a sudden, the more you do, the more you do, because word spreads, information will be shared, and you quickly become the go-to person. And that's the same kind of synergistic behavior that can happen when you guys come together from other areas. Look at Forest River. If you don't know Forest River as an organization, they have campuses all over this county. What a great opportunity to introduce some synergistic behaviors, right? I mean, they're not states away, but they have multiple campuses and great opportunity there. As we move forward here, there's also group activities that you can engage in almost on a competitive spirit perspective. And I'm happy to walk through some of that stuff. I don't know that we'll have time today, but we actually introduced a business process called the synergy groups where there's, you purposefully reinforce a behavior of creativity from within your department and give them no boundaries. So whether it's, a process improvement or the next whiz bang product that your company manufactures, and we went up to and including, introducing, training in Germany, with the Erwenheimer group with that type of activity, to we had the Fireman's Challenge on ESPN as a result of that group at the Schlott campus of Spartan Motors. I mean, there's a whole lot you can do to share and get involvement from a staff perspective. So now it's a version of inward customer service, right? Where you're reinforcing the behavior of your staff and, building that culture that, I mentioned earlier. The next question that we have is, how many companies support customer service staff, both financially and from a support perspective? Sometimes it costs money to do what's right. I can only tell you that I feel the pain of that person. Whoever wrote this question, because I've seen it. I've seen a company, been part of a company that went from private equity to public, and bringing in other leadership team members that don't exactly have the same vision as you do from a service perspective, and all of a sudden it becomes one of the first overhead departments to lose. All I can say is hopefully that's not us. This is 2021. I believe truly from my own spirit that this is an area of the organization that is a need to have, not a nice to have. And quite frankly, not only is it a need to have, it's a need to do really, really well. And so I hope that, whoever you are, that you believe in that as well, and you fight for it. But that's what I could tell you there. Some of what is in here from an answer perspective, I had already shared, like, loyalty is almost always born out of a successful service situation. I remember one time sitting in the principal's office when I was a young guy in corporate America, and the owner of the company receiving a call, and I could hear the guy screaming on the other end of the phone, and he let him say his piece. And then at the end of the day, he's like, well, I am so thankful that you called me. And that's about the time I took the cap off of my pen, because it went from screaming to listening. And it was his response. He let the guy vent, he let him go. And then it was an introduction of, I'm here to listen. I'm not going to pawn off your issue. I'm going to take care of you. I'm glad you called, because quite frankly, he even said, hey, I got to tell you, doesn't make it right, but what I want you to know is that you would never understand the integrity of my company if you didn't have an issue with your product. And once again, he gained the listening ear of the person that actually called him to complain. So I truly believe that. We've already mentioned the term customer centric, and I feel free to steal shamelessly with that term if you so desire, but it's definitely one that we continue to use even in our PDI process right here. The last question that I had from last time rather was, what is your method for customer service training? And we talked about that some, but so the training that I provided, or the information I shared rather, in our first lunch and learn took me about an hour. That was an extremely abridged version of the training that I do. And I would do from a staff perspective. I did it professionally. Everything from chiropractor offices to real estate offices with regard to interacting with a client base or the ownership of the people employed to do so. But we would have a 4 to 5 hour session that is that reinforcement of behavior, the how-tos, the what ifs, all that kind of stuff. And then it would really just be about an hour and a half to 2 hours on an annualized basis, that reinforcement of behavior piece. But once you get through that, that is the first session. And similar to a case of escalation, that's when you send them off. You're done for the day. And why are you done for the day? Well, because you want them to think about it. You want some soak time with regard to that staff of people. And so the next time that you guys come together, now it's situational. Back to the case of escalation piece. After I would build the rapport, and I mean that, after I would build the rapport, then you start talking about what right looks like. Maybe there's money involved. Maybe there's a free part involved. But I will tell you that I remember, representing a case with Spartan and Newmar down in Napanee, and the customer had a very, very expensive unit. The issue was ours. It was all ours, but we worked through it and we got to the end. And so now we're at the end. We're at the end. Now it's time to talk about what right looks like. And I asked the customer, I was like, you know what? I'm glad we got through it. Sorry it took so long, but I'm truly glad that we're through it now. We can move on. I'm going to let Matt Utley and the team at Newmar know where we're at and where we're going. But here's what I ask. I know we're responsible for this, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I would ask that you and the wife talk about what right looks like. Then I will call you tomorrow at this time. By the way, just like I said, I'll call you at this time and then find out where you're at. And God is my witness, by the way. I was ready to write those guys a big check. I mean, thousands of dollars a check, right? I'm just ready. Got the checkbook open and I'm waiting. And I call this Mr. and Mrs. And I'm like, so have you soaked on it? And they're like, yep, we have. And I'm like, oh, well, so what do you think right looks like from your perspective? And they said, well, to be quite honest with you, we spent, 600,000 or whatever they spent on their unit, and they weren't poking Newmar in the eye, but they said, look, we spent 600,000 on this unit, and we couldn't even get a his and hers Newmar jacket. So Troy, what we'd like from you is we would like you to gift us his and hers Spartan jackets. And I'm thinking in my head, you got to be kidding me. But didn't say that out loud. And I said, you know what? I get it. Makes all the sense in the world to me. Here's what I'm going to do. Not only will I send you, a his and hers jacket once I get you guys' size, and I'll probably pass that responsibility on to my gal Rosemary, because I know what it's like to ask for your wife's size, that you just don't do that. And then we'll have a whole care package that we'll send to you, because quite frankly, at the end of the day, I want you to advertise for Spartan. So not only did I send them a couple of jackets, I sent them a couple of chairs. So as they're sitting at the camp chair or at the campfire, doing what they do best, which is camping, they open up that Spartan chair and they got a story to tell. So that leads me back to training. You send them away with all of that information that you've provided, and now it's time to regain their focus in the second session and start talking situational. So what do you do with that information? And so we bring up things from personal experiences, typically poor, right? Hey, I called my auto insurance company and I took my truck in for service and, I bought this and quite frankly, this is what happened. I mean, those type, and then we role model. We have the best opportunity right then and there to play Monday morning quarterback. And if you're not a football fan, then I don't know what I call it, Monday morning quarterback. And that's using hindsight as a tool, right? Where we're being reflective and objective. So then you start to gain the participation of the group of, what would you do? What would you do in that environment, in that situation? And quite frankly, that is foundational excellence from my perspective, because it provides you, that group, with ideas, and you engage the group, you ask them for their opinion, so I have a script that we walk through, when we're in part 2 of that training environment, where it is the situational side of it. And then there are some tenets that you leave the group with. And the tenets are items like, always recognize that you are the face of the organization, that when you answer the phone, and you are General RV, where I am today, that you are representing General RV to any of our many customers. And for me, my customers is all of you, or all of the manufacturers in Elkhart County and beyond. So I want to make sure that I am demonstrating on my part, an interest to not only establish, but to maintain a partnership, and to recognize that the customers have a choice, quite frankly. What, just speaking on General RV, they're not the biggest, but I'm glad that they share a common value system, and that is to be the best. But having said that, our customers always know that they have a choice. They don't have to buy a unit from General RV. They don't have to buy a Winnebago or a Grand Design or a Forest River or a Heartland or an Alliance or any of the other manufacturers. And I apologize in advance if I didn't name one that you work at and know that I buy from. But they do, because they believe that when they buy a unit from one of our stores, that they're going to be treated fairly and be appreciated. And by the way, if you're a different RV dealer and your customers feel that way, good for you, because that's the way it should be. And then teach people to actively listen, which I've talked about twice already this afternoon, but it is so critically important. And that's intra-company, that's at the customer level, that's at every level, supplier, etc. We need to make sure that we're engaged. When we are engaged, we're focused and interested. Don't partially engage. And it's so easy to do so. But, if you're in a service organization, it's a must have or need to have, not nice to have. Again, down here in the bullets, as we get close to wrapping up, be both patient and persistent, because persistence is king. We have to recognize that, again, customers on the service side of a business don't call us to tell us how great we are, folks. It's just the way it is. So it is the willingness to step up and be counted. And quite frankly, the behavior or the backbone of the people that you have in those areas of responsibility, typically are the same ones that are going to stop on the side of the road and help a turtle get across. It's that sense of accomplishment. It's that desire to do so, the interest to help and be helpful. Those are the types of people that, will do really well for you in that type of environment. And then lastly here, always do what you say and say what you do. That is the root of everything from my perspective. So Jessica, any questions as we wrap up? Or
Yeah, just a couple. How do you, from a customer service perspective, it's hard to quantify those results, right? You can put it on a spreadsheet and say, this customer, we resolved their issue, X number of issues this month, but you can't ever really quantify a happy, satisfied customer. How have you seen that over your, career play out? Because like you said, customer service is probably the number one thing, but when you're trying to put that on a spreadsheet to give to the boss to say, this is how special the customer service department is, getting those quantity results is kind of difficult.
Right. I've had two CEOs ask me that same question. And I think it is critical to have indices from within your organization that help demonstrate success, right? But not necessarily too many, because I remember, sitting down with a gentleman that, represented an organization and was super proud of the fact that he had a piece of paper that he had 50 different indices on it, and I couldn't even read it with my readers on. I mean, I just don't know how you can get there from here, because it's kind of like making everybody responsible, and when everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. So it's important to focus on a few things and do them really well. But I will tell you that my answer to both of those CEOs was the same. And I said, so Since we've been working together, and since we've employed the business processes that we're utilizing, and we're measuring our success from everything from abandon rate, right? So we make sure our speed to answer and everything that we're doing from execution of our own tasks and responsibilities. How many calls do you get? And I'm talking to the CEO, right? How many calls do you get? And they said, well, quite frankly, I don't know that answer. And I said, so, if the letters you've received or the calls that you typically receive goes from 50 a month to 2 a month, or for, whatever that looks like, then to me, that's one of the leading indicators as we measure success. If you have the foundational stuff, there's a lot of lingering things that you can do. I always had somebody that, stayed on social media, but you got to be careful with that person, because if they're too passionate about the organization, you're going to get into an argument. So you got to be careful with that person, and they have to have some acumen and the willingness to be patient and to only jump in when you can add value. But really, the true measure of success was the fact that you had control of the customer side of your business, and they weren't calling the vice president of operations or the CEO or because they were not seeking, the answer from within your team.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer. So last question to kind of wrap it up is, sure, you mentioned briefly about the kind of people that you put into customer service. How have you hired for these people? What are the attributes that you look for when you're putting someone in that position?
So I'll, and we could have these, because I've written a couple books, but, one of them was on interviewing people and one of them was on performance evaluations. Both are critical to me. But when I would interview people for service, the first interview was always on the telephone, always. And for me, that was a need to have. And why? It's because I wanted to hear what they sounded like. And why is that important to me? Because if they're going to represent our brand, then they can't mumble. I need to make sure they had strong phone etiquette, all that kind of stuff. So that was the first gate of approval. But the second thing, quite frankly, that I'm looking for is that charisma about them. I remember, when I started service for one of the organizations I worked for, and the HR department was vetting resumes for me. A couple of weeks went by and I didn't get any. And so I went and I asked for them, and they had a whole stack of them. And I was like, well, what's wrong with these? And they're like, well, none of them really fit. And I'm like, well, do you mind if I take them? And they're like, no. And the top one happened to be a guy, and his name was Charlie Fisher. And unfortunately, the guy had lost his job as being part of a family-owned grocery store for many years, and then organizations like Meijer and the super Walmarts and stuff like that had come in, and quite frankly, left them in a lurch, so to speak. But I'm reading his resume, and he had been the meat market manager for 15 years. I'm thinking, I'm guessing that guy probably knows how to work with people.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. And then you flip it over, and he was like a third generation woodsmith. He had, and his personal interests and hobbies. And then he also liked to wrench on old cars. And I'm thinking, maybe I was asking for the wrong stuff for my human resources department, but, I called Charlie on the phone, and Charlie's like, oh, he's like, I've never even been camping before, but I like people.
There
Charlie,
you go.
that is the right answer. But, I brought him in and I sat down with him, and I will tell you that he went from brand new employee to department supervisor in 6 months. And it was because he was so soothing to talk to, that he did what he said and said what he did. He didn't always have all the answers, but he knew how to dig for them. And even the people around him, he created a behavior worthy of emulation, which was so key. Right. So the people around him wanted to be like him. So that's how I looked. Right. And I interviewed a lot of different people. I used to work with recruiting services, and I would tell them, send me your top 5 candidates. And I'm like, they're like, well, one of them might be a registered nurse. I don't care. Bring me the people that walk in the door and light up the room. That's what I want.
Nice. Well, Troy, thank you for your time today and for giving so much thought to the questions from last time. We appreciate you and everybody else. You can see everybody's throwing in the chat great information. Thank you, Troy, for being here today. So we definitely appreciate you and your support. And to everybody else, we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad I could help. Really, I am. All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.